So far in this short series of videos, what I've been bleating on about is how society is likely to, or the state system is likely to break down because of debt, the problems of debt and mass immigration, and then the society is likely to separate out along race and ethnic lines, and then finally the non-English populations are likely to repatriate themselves voluntarily as their areas become unlivable. The question is, what steps can you take? What can you do to prepare for this and to look after yourselves? Well, the first thing you can do is to make sure that our English areas, once this all comes to a head, that our English areas retain law. Without law, everyone lives in poverty and the big ones eat the little ones. If you retain the law, you can still feel safe living near other people and trading and dealing with other people. If the state goes down, the state can't provide law for you anymore. That might sound crazy and weird, but it's straightforward. If something ceases to exist, it can't provide something else. And this is unfamiliar, but it is quite easy to grasp. You can provide law for yourselves voluntarily through opting into legal systems, a bit like joining a club that has rules. Now, I've provided a system, a legal code that you can use, you can adopt. I've made it available on my website. It's free. It's at gavinbobby.com/law and freedom after the state. And feel free to go and have a look at it and use it when the time comes. The next thing you have to prepare for is the breakdown of the welfare state. And when I say the breakdown of the welfare state, I mean no more dole money, no more housing benefit, no more free NHS healthcare, the lot. Now, you might hate me for saying that's likely to happen, but that isn't me doing it. That is simply me pointing out that it is likely to happen. Again, if the state goes broke and doesn't have any money, it can't afford to pay for these things. It can't afford to pay for welfare. And there is possibly, I think there is a good side to this in the long term. The product of state interference is that I think it more than halves average wage rates. Without the interfering state, I think average wages will more than double. And you can, I refer to three things here, three of the things that the meddling state does: feminism, mass immigration, and money printing. All of these have the effect of transferring money from the poor to the rich. That, I think, is what any ruling class wants, because it renders ordinary people more manageable, easier to rule, by grinding them down, by making people a bit more poverty-stricken and dependent. Feminism and mass immigration dilute and reduce average wage rates because they increase the pool of labour, particularly the pool of people competing for the jobs that are available, where wage rates are set. Money printing increases the costs of things that you need, particularly capital assets like housing. So that feeling of anxiety, are we going to make rent this month, or will we get a house taken off us if something happens to my job? That is in large part because of the failure of the state, or the interfering effect of the state, grinding people down in order to make the bulk of the population easier to rule. So the question then is, do you want to spend your life in the welfare queue, standing where the man with the upper class accent tells you to stand, or do you want to, would you rather be able to provide for yourselves on double the wages you have now? That's before you consider the fact that there won't be a tax man around. Which is it that you would prefer? Now, that is a no-brainer, and that is why I think there could be a good side to this in the long term. Now, the third thing you can do is to create a sense of community. Now, I know you've heard that word community before. I don't mean it in the multicultural sense. In the multicultural sense, community means a sinker state where young children get shot dead in the crossfire. No, I don't mean that. I mean a place where you know your neighbours, where you spend a little bit of face-to-face time with your neighbours. You might just knock on their door and say hello occasionally, where you find there are people you like, people you trust, people you can rely on. If you build those links, what you might find is that when the state goes down, it makes it easier for you to plan, to organise, to make decisions, to protect yourselves. So get to know your neighbours. Try and join a local community organisation. Fourth, try to reduce the strength of the non-English areas between now and then, between now and matters coming to a head. Now, as regards Islamic areas, that means reducing the number of their forward operating bases, their mosques. Mosques are fortresses that delineate territory. And the weaker the opposition, the wider the range of options that we will have in dealing with them. The wider the range of options that we have in dealing with them, the more decent the methods we can choose in dealing with them. The more decent the methods we choose to use in dealing with them, the greater the moral authority that we hand on to future generations. Now, sub-Saharan African areas, they're likely to become weak of their own accord, and probably quite wretched areas of their own accord, without any interference from us. But it is still beneficial to us to be able to deal with them humanely, because it is not simply about winning. It is necessary to win, but it is necessary to win in a way which preserves our authority, our sense of pride, particularly our moral authority, so that we hand on something good, something big to future generations, in the way that we inherited it from previous generations. Fifth, hold the line. And by that I mean holding the line mentally and emotionally, so that you retain a certain toughness of mind. It will give you a kind of toughness of mind which will be useful when these things come to a head. For instance, that will enable us to stand firm when the non-English areas become unlivable, when they become wretched. It will enable us to stand our ground, so that those areas repatriate themselves voluntarily, as I think is the only solution to the problems, or the ethnic and racial problems that we face. Think this through for yourself first. And the question is, a key question is, which people, which group of people, what people would you be prepared to risk sharing your security with, and to pay money to do so? Would you be willing to risk sharing your security with Muslim people? What is the reason to do so? My guess is that most English people have no incentive whatever to risk sharing their society and their security with Muslim people, and certainly not more than 1% of the current numbers. You look at other populations, the decision there might be a bit more sensitive. What about sub-Saharan African populations? What about Romanian Gypsy populations? Are you prepared to risk sharing your security in your society, in your area, with them? If so, how many of them? 5%, 10%, 90%? I don't prescribe a number to you, but I do tell you to work it out for yourselves, to think it through for yourselves first. And you can take it a little further. What about people with long criminal records? Will you want them in your area? Will you want to have to rely on them by sharing the provision of security with them? And will you want to pay money to do so? Perhaps increased expense, because people with criminal records tend to cost more in policing costs. What about people with hard drug problems? What about the balance of compassion and your own individual security? Where do you set that balance? That is something to think through, because this problem of providing security by yourselves, for yourselves, that is likely to hit, and sooner than you might think. It is likely to become reality. Now, I say this because what it looks like we're seeing at the moment with the Maoist hysteria in response to these riots is the preface to the introduction to the beginning of the end of the age of the state. The state authority doesn't seem willing or able to protect itself and its foundations, or to protect the people it's intended to protect, as distinct from simply pushing out the gravy train a little bit longer, which is what I think the authorities want to do. The state authority appears to flinch at the weakest of challenges, and it appears to fear the consequences of standing firm more than it fears the consequences of passivity or submission. And that bodes very ill for the future, very ill for the survival of the state authority. The figureheads of this state system inspire very little trust. They inspire very little apart from mistrust. The publicists are not believed, and the people who operate the system, the apparatchiks and bureaucrats, they tend to be despised, and that suggests that we have entered on some kind of timeline here. It's almost impossible to predict the timeline, but I'll have a go. I would say that if the shape of the interest rate curve is anything to go by, that probably means that we have another 3 years at least of this Maoist hysteria continuing and getting worse. That is the preface. Now after that, I would say we probably have 3 or 4 years of the state system circling the gurgler as people increasingly realize that the state is broke and is going to collapse. And I would say that is the introduction. Then I think we have a year or two of chaos as society separates out and as dividing lines sharpen and harden, and the state system, it becomes clear that the state system has broken down. That, I think, will be the beginning of the end of the age of the state. So I think that means these matters coming to a head sometime in the late 2020s, perhaps sometime around 2028, with, give or take a couple of years, with the proviso that these things always seem to take a lot longer than you expect them to. But that is around the time to remember what I've said about providing, or the need to be able to provide law for yourselves. This state system is going to break down. But if we keep our heads, if we keep our nerve, and if we keep the law, we are likely to be able to get back our areas, our English areas, for us, the English, our land, for ourselves, as we need to, and as the whole world, the rest of the world, needs us to as well.